afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
Medyo hindi yata buhay pa ang ating kwarto ngayon, no? Good afternoon, UP Los Baños.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, pero ang boses ko medyo hindi buhay ngayon. You know, I'm currently slightly under the weather, perhaps because of climate change as well. But I'm here to, give this presentation. I would like to thank Jeanette. Where's Jeanette? Thank you very much for making this happen. Of course, thank you to Sirica. This is actually my second time to speak here in 2015. I gave a lecture in the bigger hall on the health implications of acid integration. And it's because, from the introduction, it was said that I'm a physician. But I guess I'm a different kind of physician. I really like working on big issues that are at the intersection of health and other issues, whether it's ASEAN, whether it's climate change, whether it's my first job at the Department of Health way back was migration and health. It really excites me a lot when I'm in the room and I'm the only doctor in the room. And I'm surrounded by experts from other disciplines. I'd like to acknowledge Dean Radon Piadoso from the UP College of Human Ecology. Thank you for coming here. And of course, some friends, including Professor Rodrigo Flores from the Institute of Biological Sciences. So I'm really looking forward to have this conversation with you about planetary health and have a bit of contemplation about the potential role of the Philippines in this movement. It was mentioned a while ago, I just finished my doctorate at Harvard, so you were asking me a while ago, where am I now? I'm kind of in a limbo, but tomorrow I'll be flying to Belgium to start my visiting fellowship at the Institute of Tropical Medicine in Antwerp. I'll be there until December, so this is my last talk in this 3-week sojourn here in the Philippines. And when I got the invitation from Sirica, from Jeanette, it's hard to say no to UP Los Baños. And I'll let you know shortly why. And then finally, it says there, I'm the Chief Planetary Doctor of PH Lab. Later I'll be talking a bit about it. And maybe we can explore collaborations to make sure that we identify, generate solutions, innovative solutions that advance the health of both people and the planet. Okay, UPLB is home. UPLB is my first home, and I am not embarrassed to show to you some of these pictures from 15 years ago. Renita, you can see yourself there. I don't know why are you looking at me that way. And the fourth picture, yeah. But UP Los Baños is home, and I would argue that UPLB is the place where my planetary health awareness and enlightenment began. I was in UP Rural High School. We're taught agriculture. It's originally an agricultural high school, and we learned how to drive the tractor, to take care of the carabao and chicken and the pig, hydroponics, designing your farm plots, name it. Okay? And that was really the initial introduction to issues at the nexus of human and the planet's health. Of course, I guess this picture has no relation to planetary health, but I just want to show to you that in Carabao Park, I was once San Jose in this Panuluya. Yeah. And I always joke that, during my elementary and high school, this is the only role that I play that is a protagonist, because usually I'm kontrabida, So, and of course, UPLB instilled in me the spirit of excellence, academic excellence, and serving the Filipino people. So actually that picture at the top is with our former principal, the late principal, Liza Carrascal, who just passed away a few months ago. And I dedicate this lecture to her and to other professors at UP Rural High School who have, passed on already. Of course, I moved to UP Manila. And by being a medical student is in itself an accident. You know, my first choice was business administration and accountancy in Diliman. And I was already at the brink of moving to molecular biology when I got the invitation to do internet. And I thought maybe it's, a higher calling, God's will, that I will instead pursue something I've never imagined to become. Takot nga ako sa dugo before it. So, I went to UP Manila, pursued internet. But what's interesting is that early on in my medical education, I got exposed not just to the clinical and biomedical sciences, but also to environmental issues, societal issues. I became chair of the University Student Council, and that meant really being actively involved in political issues, community concerns, student rights, and I also introduced this spirit of environmentalism in a campus that is in the middle of the metropolis. That's UP Manila Philippine General Hospital. We co-founded with a friend the first environmental health organization of UP Manila. Imagine, during its 100-year history, there was no organization in UP Manila that brings together the medical students, the nursing students, the pharmacy students, etc., to look at environmental issues which are deeply intertwined with human health. So, we did a lot of activities. We were bringing doctors to, plant trees and clean the Manila Bay and address waste management issues in the community. And then after med school, it's no surprise that I did not pursue a career in clinical medicine. I did not take, specialty training in a hospital, but instead I pursued a career in public health. And in particular, one of the areas that I focus on is the intersection between climate change and human health. And, in the first photo, you will see me and my fellow advocates calling for the phase out of coal. We need to kill coal because coal kills people. And then, this picture is, at the Paris Agreement, conference in of course in Paris, and we the health sector have been actively advocating for the highlighting of the human health implications of climate change in the treaty. So it's been an exciting life so far, although the issues that we're trying to confront are far from exciting at all. But what I realize is that this is really not something far-fetched for the field of medicine. Because even millennia ago, the father of Western medicine, Hippocrates, in his less famous text, Air, Water, and Spaces, he was talking about the role of physicians and medical students in understanding the winds, the water supply, air quality, the composition of the soil, and how all of these environmental factors lead to the creation or the destruction of health. Unfortunately, as medicine has evolved, this command from the father of medicine himself has disappeared over time. But now I think we are returning to the old era, as the issues of environmental change and degradation, climate change, so on and so forth, are becoming more prominent, and human health is at stake. So I just want to make sure that this room has a shared understanding of what health is. Usually I examine my participants or students, what do you mean by health? If you hear the word health, what is the first thing that comes to mind? But I'll give you the answer. It's not merely the absence of disease. It's referring to a complete state of physical, mental, and social well-being. And I would even add ecological well-being, especially now that we are confronting all these issues. And then in a commission that I was fortunate to be involved in, which looked at global governance for health, we redefined health. It's a precondition. It's a precondition for a sustainable society. It's an outcome of development. So you will see a bilateral or bidirectional relationship. You need health for economic progress, and you need development in order to achieve health. It's a two-way street. And it's also an indicator of a sustainable society, and therefore, health should be a universal value and a shared social and political objective for all. Health is not just something that should be left to doctors alone. In fact, that's very dangerous if we leave health to the physicians and to the nurses and to the medical care complex. Everyone in this room should be involved in the creation of health. And this is an interesting slide, and I always show this. And I show this, to different audiences, from CEOs to politicians. They are really surprised that medical care, your hospitals, your rural health units, your clinics, your doctors, your medicines, they only contribute 20% to the health of the population. But the majority of health is produced, partly from behavioral factors, smoking, alcohol, our eating behavior, lifestyle. But the bulk of it is coming from the social and environmental factors. How we are stratified in society, the divide between the rich and the poor. Your occupation dictates your future health. Your gender, and now we're talking about SOGI, the health of the LGBT, for instance, is definitely way, way less than the health of the other gender identities. So it's important that we really need to address these other factors that aid in the creation of health. And, again, this is not a new idea. Even in the 1800s, Rudolf Virchow, okay? Who's familiar with Virchow in this room? Or the Baños students? Okay? I'm sure you've heard of Virchow in biology, right? Virchow's cell theory, Virchow's triad, of hemostasis. He has many contributions in the field of biological sciences and medicine. But he is also considered the father of social medicine. And he once said, "Do we not always find the diseases of the populace traceable to defects in society?" So it's not just the microbe, not the bacteria, the virus, it's not just the chemical, but it's really the structure, the way we organize ourselves in society, our economy, the way we manage our natural resources. All of these are the root causes of ill health and health inequality. And that's why we always ask ourselves, what good does it do to treat people's illnesses only to send them back to the conditions that made them sick? I'm giving the treatment to the patient with tuberculosis. It's a 6-month-long treatment. And then I send the patient back to the slum area where all his neighbors are coughing the mycobacterium. Okay? Or provide education about tobacco cessation. Okay? But all his classmates are doing it. So how can we really affect lasting change in health when we just keep on sending back the people to their original, habitats? Right? So, with all those ideas percolating in my mind, I thought maybe climate change should really be rebranded, repackaged, recommunicated as a public health issue. It's not just about polar bears getting dehydrated in the Arctic. It's not just about economies just being shrinking because of phasing out of coal and other unhealthy sources of energy. But it's really about people. It's really about communities, especially the vulnerable and the underserved, that will be affected by climate change in this century. So, as I've said, I chose climate change as one of the areas, or one of the the themes and the battles of my life. That's me in front of the UP College of Medicine, in a way somehow protesting and reminding my fellow doctors that climate change is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. But then, tackling climate change could be the greatest global health opportunity of the 21st century. It's interesting because now we have a cure, or we have a treatment that is not in a pill, but it is planetary in scale. I would even say it's planetary prevention of diseases if we address climate change. 2018, so this is actually the first chapter of my thesis. I talk about 2018 being the early warning signal for climate and health. And we've seen all of these reports. We only have 10 years remaining to address climate change. We have the initial effects of climate change already manifesting. The past 5 years are the hottest years ever in recorded history. So all of these are just a sneak preview of what's going to happen in the next couple of years and decades. Okay? The planet has just 5% chance of reaching the Paris climate goal. So, and sometimes you think, maybe we should, not just focus our efforts on trying to curb our emissions, but really preparing our communities and enhancing their adaptive capacity so they can live in this new normal in the next 50 to 100 years. And of course, we've seen these. We've seen these pictures. These are familiar pictures to us. Guess where this picture was taken from? It's one of the biggest calamities so far. Yolanda, Typhoon Haiyan, in Tacloban. And when climate-related extreme weather events wreak havoc in communities and countries, it's not just about the architecture of your cities that are destroyed, but also your food systems, your water systems, agriculture, education, and even healthcare systems. In fact, in Yolanda, there were health workers that were not able to report to the health centers and to the hospitals because they themselves were victims. So how can we make health systems the last building or the last system standing when climate-related calamities do occur? Okay. This is the front page of the Inquirer, I think the following day. And Yolanda, climate change, extreme weather events, they're the worst disaster to hit PH, which is the Philippines. But I would argue it's also the worst disaster to hit PH, the people's health, public health, and even planetary health. Okay? I'm not sure if you're aware that the rate of sea level rise in the Philippines is faster than the global rate. Okay? And so, I'm starting to really get concerned about our coastal communities. How are they, coping and addressing? In fact, there's growing evidence that people in coastal communities are drinking highly salinized water as a result of seawater intrusion into their groundwater. Okay? And that is leading to increasing rates of hypertension and preeclampsia, which is hypertension among pregnant women. Okay? So these obviously have health effects. Okay? There are islands that are already, quote-unquote, sinking, disappearing. And therefore there's a need to not just enhance their infrastructure, but eventually to relocate them to places, to other places. But international law is not ready. We don't have international instruments that will support what we are calling now quote-unquote climate refugees. But I don't want to call them refugees, because refugee in the international conventions, the Refugee Convention, these are people that are leaving their countries because of political persecution, because of war and conflict. But these people are not moving away because of war and conflict, something that is human-induced, but this is natural. Or we can argue this is also anthropogenic, because climate change is anthropogenic. But we don't have the instruments that will provide support for these people. Okay. This slide shows to you how climate change and human health are interconnected or are linked, the different pathways. And I'm not going to detail, but as you can see, the wide variety of climate-related effects, whether they're typhoons or drought, heat waves, they are going to affect human health eventually. Okay? And the effects are widespread, wide-ranging. Okay? We always think, oh, maybe it's just the infectious diseases, dengue, okay? The mosquito-borne diseases that will, resurge because of climate change. But also non-communicable diseases, cardiovascular diseases as a result of extreme heat. Okay? Injuries coming from natural disasters. And there is also growing evidence that even mental health or mental disorders are linked to climate change. Heat or disasters, etc. Or the insecurity of living in a climate unstable future. That also adds psychological stress. And in the Philippines, we have little research happening in these areas. And our physicians, I can see one colleague of mine from the UP College of Medicine, were not necessarily taught about these only until recently. And the sad part, sure, climate change is going to lead to a wide variety of health consequences. But the health impacts are not fairly distributed. Okay? In the top map, you will see the countries, those that are zoomed in, those that are enlarged. These are the countries that have emitted the greatest amount of greenhouse gases. High-income countries, Europe, North America. Okay? How about what the bottom map? What does it tell us? Okay? The countries that were enlarged or blown up, these are the countries that will be affected by the excess health burden resulting from climate change. And what are those regions? Africa, Asia, okay? The Pacific Islands, although they're too small to be zoomed in. So, the thing is, this is an issue of climate justice. The ones who emitted and the ones who will suffer the health consequences, they're two different sets of countries. Okay? And so we need to make sure that when we talk about climate change, we don't forget the equity and the justice implications or dimensions of this issue. Okay? And this is a new paper from last year. Okay? And I'm sure you've heard from the UN, we've actually been underestimating the rate of climate change and the effects. We thought, we still have until, maybe 2040, but actually it's faster and sooner, okay? And this is also a new finding. Climate change is also driving other forms of changes in the global ecosystem, okay? From, effects on the coral reefs to, effects on, forests, etc. And the term that they use here in this paper is a hothouse Earth. Okay? Before we were talking about greenhouse. Now it's really a hothouse that we are headed to. And a hothouse unlike a greenhouse, which is controlled, I'm sure the agriculture folks here know how a greenhouse works, but a hothouse is something beyond control. It just keeps on getting hotter and hotter, and it's driving more changes that we've never seen before. So we are in a spiral that will lead us to destruction. And I don't want to sound like it's a gloom and doom. You know, I think that's the reason why we're convened here, is because we think there are still solutions. But this is the reality, and this is what science is saying. And as an academic institution, these are, evidence that we might want to be updated about. Okay? So the UN last Monday just had the UN Climate Summit. And really, we are not just experiencing, slow burn climate change. It is an emergency, And, as a physician, when there's an emergency in the emergency room, how do you act? You don't wait. You don't watch, right? You check the vital signs right away. A, B, C, right? The airway, the breathing, the circulation of blood. So that is the same approach that we must undertake if we are going to address this climate emergency that is unfolding right in front of our very eyes. Okay, we talk about climate change. We talk about its effects on health and its equity dimensions. And climate change, as you know, is an anthropogenic process. Right? There's natural climate change. But what we're seeing now in the past 100 years is anthropogenic in nature. And because of the humanization of the environment, of the natural environment that we have affected on the planet, there was even a suggestion that maybe this epoch, okay, do we have geologists in the room? I'm just curious. Or anyone with an earth science background. Remember, we have different epochs, right? And right now, we live in the Holocene epoch. But actually, the suggestion now is to, introduce a new epoch called Anthropocene. And Anthropocene connotes that this is the only epoch in geological history where humanity is the biggest force of change. Okay? Before, it's natural, ice age, the dinosaurs. But now, it's human beings that really are shaping the face of the planet. And in turn, these effects are affecting our own health. And that is, again, it's not written there, but Anthropocene is the new phrase or new term that is being promoted. So, because we live in the era of, or the Anthropocene epoch, there was a proposal to create a new discipline. Okay? And a while ago I mentioned about public health, okay, which is about the health of human populations, health of people. But now we are starting to recognize that the health of people and the health of the planet are deeply intertwined and in fact inseparable. And so this new field that was proposed is called planetary health. Okay? So I invite you to read this 50-page report by the Rockefeller Foundation and the Lancet, which introduces what is planetary health, what are the issues, what are the areas, what are the challenges. Interestingly, Rockefeller Foundation, more than 100 years ago, was also the foundation that funded the initial efforts to establish the field of public health. So now they're saying it cannot just be about human populations anymore. The health of the planet should be looked into alongside human health. Okay? So I already defined it in a way. Planetary health is the health of the human civilization and the natural systems in which it depends. Okay? So, I'll just take a break and I'll show you a short clip about what planetary health is. And this is from the Planetary Health Alliance.
Planetary health is a very recently emerging field focused on understanding the human health implications of our rapid disruption and transformation of our planet's natural systems. We're really concerned that potentially the majority of the global burden of disease over the next century is going to result from our impacts across our planet's natural systems, from our disruption of the climate system, of global fisheries, of biodiversity loss, of accelerating scarcity of fresh water and arable land degradation, of changes in biogeochemical cycles, and that all of those transformations are accelerating at a pace that threatens every dimension of human health.
So we're downstream from the largest industrial project on the planet. So this is tar sands. It's not your sweet crude oil. It's more like peanut butter. And these projects aren't just threatening climate, they're threatening the survival of people. In this case, it's my people. When I saw what was happening in my territory, it's literally like seeing someone destroy a relative, because that is who I am.
So there's massive, massive illegal logging going on. And, when I first started, it was really easy to hate those loggers, but they just didn't have any choices. They were in these impossible situations where they had to choose between the well-being of their family and the well-being of the natural ecosystem. And they very, very clearly understood that if the forest was protected, it meant less disease for the community, and it meant more water for their rice fields, and then those rice fields were feeding their family. So they saw this as a really clear trade-off between short-term and long-term well-being.
I've started to wonder whether part of the predicament that we're in isn't a result of renouncing the authority of that awe and reverence that so many of us actually experience toward the natural world. I feel like we've gone pretty far away from that.
We need to change our spiritual identity. We need to provide ourselves with spiritual fuel so we can see the earth not just as something physical, but it has a spirit.
We somehow seem to have gotten away from talking about values and ethics, but it's something I believe we need to get back to. I think all of us are driven by our sense of values, but we don't talk about our collective shared values as much as we should.
The positive vision is right there for us to see. For my children and their children, it's easy for me to imagine a world in 100 years where human population has stabilized, where human populations continue to congregate in cities, but where those cities have been designed with intent and with thoughtfulness about how to minimize their inhabitants' ecological footprints and optimize their health and well-being. And it's quite easy to imagine a world in which with every passing decade after that, there is more room for the rest of the biosphere, not less. That to me is every bit as likely a future for my children's grandchildren as the catastrophic future. And the point is that it all depends on what we decide to do right now today. That's the urgency of now.
So now, in this segment, I will just introduce some of the core ideas or core concepts that underpin this new quote-unquote field of planetary health. And I said quote-unquote because even within this young community of planetary health, there is a bit of a discourse, a bit of a confusion, whether are we actually a new field. Some people say, maybe we're just old wine in a new bottle. Okay? Are we a new discipline? Are we a policy framework? A new way of discussing the modern day, the contemporary challenges that are facing both the health of the people and the planet? Are we a new scientific paradigm? Okay? Are we introducing a really new way of thinking about all these interconnected issues, is planetary health a communication strategy? Again, there's nothing new about it, but it's just a new branding or a new way of framing these issues. But also, is planetary health something of a new moral imperative that the other sciences before, because of their adoption or assertion of objectivity, neutrality, this planetary health, moral imperative is something really new because it has a deep concern for justice and equity. Okay? I'm pretty sure some of you have heard, some of the terms that are in these slides. But I just want to share with you how these quote-unquote fields or disciplines have evolved over time. So on your left side, you will see the evolution of the field of, public health or the health sciences, coming from the old tropical medicine of colonial times. The colonizers established schools of tropical medicine, both in their home countries and in their colonies, to make sure that the colonizers don't get the disease. So it's not really for the colonized, right? And then it evolved into public health, when the colonies have already been dismantled. Now we're talking about the health of the population. And then international health, because we now recognize, or they recognize, that the health of other countries is also very important to address, especially the health of poorer countries. And then global health is an evolution of international health to remove the distinction between poor and rich countries. Because all countries will be affected by the same Ebola or the same heart diseases. Okay? So that's the evolution from the health or the public health side. If you look at the other side, it tells you the evolution from environmental health, which, I would say is the mother field. But over time, environmental health has adopted a reductionist approach, looking for that specific toxin or chemical linking into a specific symptom or syndrome. The effect of lead on autism, the effect of particulate matter on asthma. So, again, very reductionist and narrow. And then later, the veterinarians realized we need to work more with the human medicine specialists, the physicians, and the public health folks. And that's why One Health was born, especially in this day and age of zoonosis, diseases that come from animals, transferred to human beings. Okay. And then eco-health emerged. The environmental scientists also realized we need to work with the human doctors. Geohealth is also a relatively new field. It emanated from the geologists, and they're looking at soil composition leading to nutritional impacts, or I think even earthquakes and volcanic eruptions and how they're affecting the health of populations. What I'm seeing now is these two different streams are reaching a convergence, and I would argue that it's planetary health, where the health, again, of people and the planet are now seen as together. Okay? So, where are you now in this framework? And are your institutions or you personally are ready to move or transition towards a planetary health way of thinking? But I also remind my Harvard professors that planetary health is not originated at Harvard. Because even the early peoples, the indigenous peoples of every culture have already acknowledged the inseparability of human health and the planet's health. Okay? Chief Seattle from the US, one of the Native American Indians, to the earth does not belong to man. Man belongs to earth. Man did not weave the web of life. He is merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. And I'm pretty sure we can also find similar examples, from the Cordilleras, from our indigenous populations in different parts of the Philippines and globally, saying or articulating the same message. In that paper by the Lancet and the Rockefeller Foundation, they identified 3 main challenges in this emerging field of planetary health. The first one is conceptual and empathy failures, or what they also call imagination challenges. It's just so hard to imagine, and that is why science has become reductionist over time. It's so hard to imagine how the broader climate system leads to an asthma attack or leads to a psychosis, right? But now we are starting to acknowledge that those long causal chains will need to be understood and will need to be addressed. Okay? So that is the first challenge of imagination challenge. It's just so hard to imagine. And so it's therefore imperative for us to use, not just our coconuts, but also advanced methods in order to, understand these very difficult and complex interconnections. The second one is knowledge failures, research and information challenges. These issues also carry a huge of uncertainty, surprises, emergence, things that many of the scientific fields are allergic towards. Okay? We always want some degree of certainty. We always want to achieve some level of clarity. Okay? But in this day and age, where there are not just knowns, but also known unknowns, and unknown unknowns, all of these have to be recognized in our research and investigation. And then finally, implementation failures, governance challenges. The way we organize our governments, the way we design our economies, they are not anymore compatible with the challenges that we are being confronted with. Our economies that rely on fossil fuels, on carbon, the carbon economy, these should be made obsolete if we are to address planetary health challenges. Okay? Our governments that are siloed across into departments and bureaucracies, agencies that don't talk to each other, we need to think of innovative ways to make governance work for planetary health. So I wonder if we have colleagues here from this, I believe you have a School of Public Administration and Management. How can we even make planetary health work or operate at the local level? Okay? This slide shows to you how our consumption patterns, our demographic shifts, increasing population mobility, introduction of new technology have altered our ecosystems, and in turn is altering the face of human health. I'll not go into detail. And interestingly, in the fourth column or fourth section, you will see mediating factors. The way we govern ourselves, culture. They can make or break our approaches to planetary health. So this is not just a field that requires, environmental science and climatology, etc. We need the social sciences so that we can mount solutions, that whether in business or governance, that can address these issues. the founders of planetary health or even its precursor, they've always raised the question, how can we design a safe operating space for humanity? How can we make this planet livable for all? And the Stockholm Resilience Institute, which asked that question, also developed this framework called the Planetary Boundaries Framework. Can I have a show of hands? Who among you have heard of the Planetary Boundaries Framework? Okay. So all the more we really need to study and get updated about this. Basically what this framework is saying is that there are at least, as of the moment, and they're still investigating this further, there are 9 planetary boundaries. And these are not physical boundaries, that when you pass, when you cross the stratosphere, you're already outside of the planet. You're now in the galaxy or whatever. It's not a physical boundary. These planetary boundaries are thresholds that if we violate them or we breach them, then we will reach a point of no return. We would have crossed the Rubicon, and people and the planet will now become inhabitable. Okay? So in this framework, you will see 9 boundaries, and 3, or actually 2, okay, 2 of the boundaries have already been breached, and they are in red. Biosphere integrity, because we have seen in the past at least 100 years the fastest rate of extinction of our biodiversity. And the other planetary boundary that was breached already is biogeochemical flows, okay, of phosphorus and nitrogen as a result of what? Our incessant use of artificial fertilizers. And so, to our colleagues from the College of Agriculture, this is something that we should be very alarmed, and something that we might want to really take a leading role in addressing. Okay? And then the ones in yellow, those are the boundaries that are close to being breached. One is climate change. Another is land system change. We are turning every forest into a plantation or a subdivision or a golf course. Okay? And then of course the others, we want to make sure we don't breach these boundaries. Okay? Of course, not breaching the boundaries is an important goal for humanity. But we also have to make sure that while not breaching boundaries, we are also able to meet the needs of society, of modern society. And that is why Kate Raworth, that's her and me, we were at Oxford. She is an economist, but a radical economist, not your, not the classical type of economist. And she's a female economist. And I would argue that a lot of the female economists now are really shaping the man-made, the male-dominated economics of our universities across the world. She developed this framework called the donut economics. Although when we met, she apologized for her using the donut, which is one of the unhealthiest food on the planet. But it's a donut because she was able to combine the planetary boundaries, which is the external circle of the donut, and the minimum social foundation, which is the inner circle of the donut. And she was arguing that our economies, our societies, should remain within the green donut. We should not overshoot beyond the planetary boundaries, but we cannot have shortfalls or be below the inner circle of the donut. Okay? So the inner circle of the donut, you will see, health, education, women empowerment, political inclusion, access to energy, housing. We need to make sure people are achieving all these basic needs, while at the same time not going beyond the planetary boundaries. The challenge is, how can we make it work? Okay? And how can we even do it, not at the planetary scale, but even at the level of the LGU, that people are happy and healthy, high literacy, everyone is working, housing conditions are okay, but also artificial fertilizers and pesticides are not used so as not to destroy the biogeochemical cycle, etc., etc. Okay. And there's one study by the University of Leeds in the UK. What they did is they studied the world's countries and assessed which country is closest to achieving the donut. Okay. So now I'm giving you three multiple choice exam. You have 3 countries there. Which country do you think of the 3 is closest to the donut economy that does not violate planetary boundaries but meet also the current social needs of people? Anyone who can shout which country based on what you're seeing now? Okay. Is it the USA? You can see it exceeded the boundary, Sure, they have all these, the GDP per capita is okay, the democracy is functioning. I would argue their healthcare system is the worst in the world, after having seen it myself. But they have also destroyed their environment. Their footprint is so huge. Okay? Interestingly, the Philippines is in the middle. Okay? We've not breached a boundary, good news. But also, we have so many shortfalls in the social foundation. And I'm sure you've seen that every day. People are not eating. People do not have access to free, affordable, quality health care. People are not literate. Okay? And the country that is closest to the donut, according to this report, is Vietnam. Very interesting. One of our ASEAN countries. Of course, it's also important to look at this from a historical context. We know what Vietnam, or how Vietnam evolved as a society from being a communist country. So maybe that has a role. But the challenge is how to be like Vietnam or the Philippines. Okay? And when we talk about planetary health as well, I already highlighted the importance of equity and social justice. Because this is what's happening. As I've said, everyone will be affected by air pollution, by climate change, by environmental degradation. But the wealthy and the middle class, they have assets, capacities that will enable them to cope with the changes. And who will be left behind? The poor. With no money, with no assets, poor social capital, not a priority of governments. Right? They are the ones that will suffer the brunt both of chronic poverty but also environmental degradation. Okay? So those are the core concepts. Okay? Now I'll just do a quick run through of the planetary health issues. I'm pretty sure you can also name your own planetary health issue. Okay? We mentioned climate change, we mentioned biodiversity loss, nutrition, right? Or undernutrition. And I would argue it's a double burden of nutrition. Many people are not able to eat and continue to be undernourished. But also a lot of people are able to eat so much and that we are having a global pandemic of obesity and heart disease. Water use is also a major issue. They even say that the next world war might be about water. Okay. Soil degradation, again, because of our addiction to artificial fertilizers and pesticides. Okay. And as you can see, all the bad things in planetary health are going up. CO2, ocean acidification, which can lead to destruction of marine ecosystems, energy use, especially coming from coal and other fossil fuels, deforestation, water use, and fertilizer use. And all of these have great impacts on human health. Okay. We already touched on infectious diseases, the old ones coming back, the ones that we are trying to fight, will be much more difficult to eradicate, and new ones will re-emerge. Polio is back in the country. Diphtheria is back in the country. We just had the biggest measles outbreak in history. Okay? And more is yet to come if we don't act soon and we don't act together. Okay? Ebola, as I've said, there are, that's one of the hypotheses, it might be linked to climate change, but it's also linked to deforestation. They've altered their forest ecosystems there in the 3 countries that were affected with the Ebola crisis in 2014. And because of that disturbance, Ebola returned and reached the human populations in cities, not in the rural areas. Okay? Re-emerging and emerging infections, I already said that. The world is a world of microbes, even within ourselves, right? There's this concept called microbiome. And now we're starting to study and try to understand more, the functions and the roles of these microbes that live within the human body. But also in the natural environment, we can find many of them. Okay? Antimicrobial resistance. And AMR, okay, is not really predominantly contributed by the prescription behaviors of physicians right here and there. Okay? The bulk of it is really resulting from our use of it in livestock and poultry. Okay? And so we need to work with the agricultural sector, the human husbandry sector, the animal husbandry sector, to really address this issue, which if we will not address, will have huge impacts on humanity. Imagine, there will come a time when your surgeon will prefer not to operate on you because you'll die first of the infection and not because of the tumor. Okay. So AMR. This is a very interesting, and this is not meant for you to really scrutinize each of the boxes. But this is just to show to you that obesity and its causes can be illustrated in this manner. Okay? It's not just about what I call the Jollibization of our cities, or in the States, the McDonaldization of our cities. But it's really rooted in so many different causes. Physical activity or lack thereof, Our neighbors, our fiestas, our weekend, buffets, my God. The samgyeopsal industry, it's a great time for the samgyeopsal industry in the Philippines. Okay. I just ate it a few days back, by the way, because it's so expensive in the States. But we need to start really looking at the whole obesity ecosystem and address the different factors in all fronts. And it's not just the task of the physician to tell the patient to start moving and to eat less, but really the agriculture folks, the industry, etc., to be part of this anti-obesity revolution that needs to happen. Okay? And when we talk about food systems, okay, we're not just talking about, the actual consumption, but really the production, the transport of food, the economies that underlie our food systems, the environment that is destroyed because of our abuse of water resources and intense use of energy. Our culture is also something that is so challenging to grapple with. So how are we going to address our food system through all these different entry points? Okay? Climate change is affecting food safety as well. Okay? Food spoilage is faster because of all these different climate change related effects. I'm not going to detail. Okay? Meanwhile, our obsession with meat is also leading or contributing to the immense emission of carbon to the atmosphere. Okay? 14.5% of total greenhouse gas emissions. And that is why recently, early this year, there was a Lancet commission that came up with this proposal, and they called it the Planetary Health Diet. And what is the Planetary Health Diet? Unlike your, slimming diets, like or weight reduction diets, Atkins, South Beach, or ketogenic diet. This diet was designed in a way that it provides the adequate nutrition needed by every person on Earth. But also, the food on this plate is produced in the lowest carbon fashion. Okay? So they combine both the health and the environmental aspects. And so what is the result of this analysis? The plate will be, the half of the plate will have to be comprised of fruits, vegetables, green vegetables. Okay? You can't even see meat there. Okay? Animal source protein, okay? Very small portion. I think the recommendation is even just 1 serving per week. Okay? Okay? Even rice, white rice, refined rice, occupies a very small portion in this plate. So if we are going to put the planetary health plate on every person or every family's table, how are we going to transform our our food system? I remember I presented this to livestock people, and they were revolting against me, because the livestock industry is supporting the livelihood of 1 billion people, okay? Which is a legitimate concern. But what we need to do is a really good analysis of the costs and the benefits, the trade-offs. And at the same time, find other ways to ensure people are employed, but also the planet is protected and households are fed. Okay? Energy is also another planetary health issue. I've already insinuated on it several times. And the evidence is showing, I'll just summarize, that the unhealthiest forms of energy are also the most climate disruptive. They emit the greatest amount of carbon. Lignite, which is the softest form of coal, oil, etc. Of course, we should take this with a grain of salt, because it tells you that nuclear is the lowest carbon, but it's also the healthiest. Okay? Perhaps if we ensure that no nuclear disaster happens, which happens once in a while, Fukushima, Chernobyl, if we put the necessary safeguards, then maybe it's the wave of the future. It's the way to go. Okay? And now there is a increasing amount of interest in understanding the health and the climate benefits of these actions, whether in the energy sector. If we move from coal to solar, or coal to wind, how much carbon will we avoid emitting? But also how much health will we be producing? Or conversely, how much disease will we be avoiding? Same thing with dietary change. If we shift from a meat-based diet to a plant-based diet, how much carbon will be avoided and how much health will be produced? And of course, it's linked to this concept of the circular economy or circular metabolism. How can we make sure that our cities, our countries, our LGUs, our planet, there's no resource that is wasted? Okay? No resource that is wasted. The energy is not wasted. Okay? In fact, Kate Raworth, the author of the Donut Economics, was even suggesting maybe we should be measuring our economies not based on GDP, but based on energy, which is the ultimate currency of societies and economies. From the ATP that is produced in the body, that is transformed to work, and then that produces products. Okay? So that's a long causal chain or chain of energy production. And, from the health sector's perspective, we are also asking, are we build health systems that consider the climate. Okay? Because health systems now, in general, are not ready for this new normal. How we educate the next generation of doctors and health workers to be climate resilient. Okay? How can we make sure, health services continue to be provided despite all these environmental, climate-related catastrophes? Okay? So I'll just rest for a bit, and I'll show to you. You mentioned a while ago, I also produce short films, and as part of my doctoral dissertation, I came up with produced short films about my case studies. Because I know that my 200-page dissertation will only be read by my community, but these movies can be shown to the world. And so I created these and hope you enjoy. Which somehow sums up the links between climate, health, environment that we've been talking about a lot.
Ang pagkakaunawa ko kasi sa climate change, gawa kasi siya ng tao.
Your regular climate behavior that you are anticipating, biglang nagbago. Kami, naranasan talaga namin yung impacts rin of climate change, which includes the sea level rise, may coral bleaching, may drought.
Dahil ito ay coastal areas, alam ba nila natataas yung level ng dagat? Kung uulan, mas matindi yung precipitation. Kung mag-init, mas prolonged period of drought.
May mga corals daw na siguro sa increase ng, di natin alam, if sa temperature yan, nasisira.
Dahil sa sea level rise, yung mga bahay nila ay abot na yung mga sahig nila.
Dati, kung ganito lang yung kadami ng typhoon, ngayon, iba na, mas madami na.
We were supposedly the first to be hit. We knew the mangroves will protect us. Kung bumagsak yun dito, sabi sa amin, based on simulation, 60% of us would have been gone.
If the problem will occur today as of this moment, parang hindi. Hindi, kasi marami kasi kami kakulangan. Ang pinaka ko talagang manpower, wala din kaming ECG, wala kaming CT scan, wala din kaming X-ray. As a doctor, ang malaking epekto ng climate change sa kalusugan ng mga tao.
Rampat, yung dengue, at saka yung amoeba.
Hindi ka nakasanayan yun sa mga tao na iniinom. So kung yun ang iinumin nila, mag-iba yung stomach nila.
Tayo ang gumagawa, tapos ang epekto, tayo din ang nag-harvest. Tayo ang gumagawa talaga ng sakit natin.
If your island community will become more inaccessible, how will you design a health system in that area? So what we did, accept na kada isang barangay, our communities, they have different health needs. And because they have different health needs, iba-iba yung approach mo.
Si healthy yung magko-complement kung paano maging malusog yung mga pamayanan pagdating ng climate change.
Your local health system has to really be climate adaptive. It has to be because the changing climate will have new health challenges. And every new health challenge would require a new system, a new solution to resolve it. So it's evolving.
Pag sabihin natin climate smart, hindi siya madadaan kung gaano kayaman ng munisipyo, kundi ito ay madadaan kung paano ba maka-cope up si community sa mga impact ni climate change.
We thought initially it's all about infrastructures and systems. What we realized, it all boils down to basic values. How do we now translate values to become part of your systems and structures?
Mas better na mag-expend tayo ng millions of money for preparation, not for the response.
All of our multi-purpose centers can withstand up to typhoon signal number 4. To protect landslide, isisimento mo talaga yung road. So, it becomes access to health. But it's a climate mitigation as well.
Ang food security, kahit walang dumating na mga goods galing sa ibang probinsya, kaya naming mabuhay.
We're also building one of the first climate field schools for farmers and fisher folks. Is to capacitate the farmer and the fisherman how to do it right if your climate is like this. Your communities, they know more than you do. Then your role becomes a facilitator. Allow them to develop a system that allows adaptation, innovation, all the time. Kasi nagbabago yung sakit, depende sa klima mo.
Yung indigenous at science, pagsabayin mo dun, andun yung masasabi mong innovation.
How do you make the right decisions? Babalik at babalik ka sa science. Kaya, yun din isang ina-advocate namin, science-based governance. We now have data to make better and more informed decisions of how to change and adapt to reach our targets, our vision. The problem is, it changes all the time. We live in a world of uncertainty na eh. The only certain is that you have the capacity to address the uncertainty. The local government's at the forefront of climate change. The national government is so far away. If the drought happens next season, they simply go to the local government. That's the structure of, our society.
Pag healthy yung environment mo, natural na healthy din yung mga tao. Pag ang mangrove management mo ay maayos, pag merong bagyo, merong storm source, yung mga tao ay maayos sila.
Their climate adaptability, which started from us understanding yung vulnerabilities namin, to preparing survival, to now having quality of life. Just preparing for the future. Climate change was never a threat to us. Kaysa katakutan mo siya, may iwan na siyang kakampi. That's why it's an opportunity to do something better.
So, I'm approaching the end of my presentation. And I just want to show to you some of the activities in this exciting new field of planetary health. So as you already mentioned a while ago, we have a new journal, we have an alliance, we have, this is University of California, we have universities across the world, but especially in Europe and North America, that are establishing programs and centers that focus on planetary health. And this is something that maybe you, Baños, might want to consider, given your wide range of expertise, covering many of the planetary health issues that I mentioned a while ago. So there's so many, activities and initiatives already happening. Sometimes I am usually the only Asian in the room, and so the reason why I'm also making sure that this planetary health gospel is heard is that so next time we will have more Filipinos and ASEAN scholars and practitioners to be part of these activities and initiatives. This is the first planetary health conference held at Harvard. 4 weeks ago, we had our third planetary health conference in Stanford, and that's how I got to meet Jeanette. But hopefully in the fourth one, in the next one, which is in 2021 in Brazil, we have a big Filipino delegation presenting, cutting-edge research and participating in global debates. I'm not going to detail here, but basically, when we talk about a field, a new field, we talk about research, education, and practice. And you might be asking, what is a planetary health research and what is not? Okay? And in this diagram, which we're still developing, we're trying to think about, how can a project become a planetary health project as opposed to a merely environmental science project, say about species conservation, or climate change impacts on agriculture, or green spaces in cities. So those are all environmental, ecological science projects. How can we make sure they become planetary health in paradigm, in framework? And that is, it is important to link it with a human health aspect. So for example, if we're doing a species conservation work, but we're trying to understand and study a species that have potential medicinal value, then that somehow brings together the environmental and the human health sciences. So same with climate change, agricultural impacts, and nutritional consequences, etc., etc. So I'm not going to detail, but it just shows to you that if we bring together the ecological and the human sciences, then we might be able to come up with planetary health research. Sadly, there's no College of Medicine here in UP Los Baños. But we're one UP, and UP Manila PGH is just 2 hours away without traffic. Maybe 3 with traffic, but can be 5 minutes away via Skype. So it's just a matter of making those connections, and perhaps we can come up with collaborative projects across campuses. The next one, as I've said, is planetary health education. And in this article in The Lancet, they came up with cross-cutting principles for planetary health education. I just heard from one of your colleagues here that there's some idea about creating a course that links environment and human health, and perhaps planetary health is a potential good framework for UP Los Baños, talking about all the covering all these different principles. If you notice, it's not just about the research part and the science part, it's about policy, governance, movement building. Because we want to make sure planetary health, unlike many fields, doesn't get captured in the ivory tower, and it becomes really relevant to the needs of people in the Philippines and worldwide. So planetary health education. And then planetary health practice, because what I observe is there's obsession around research and education. When Jeanette and I were in Stanford, a lot of the presentations, the posters are really about research and training, education, new modules or new courses. But there's really little conversation around what is planetary health's implication in practice. And this is what I'm suggesting, as my 7 I's of planetary health practice. We need to make sure planetary health is institutionalized in our governance structures. We are able to integrate issues in the policy arena. We are putting the right investments for planetary health and being creative in terms of where we get our financial resources from. The management of planetary health information. The health sector has its own database. Pag-asa has its own climate database. I'm pretty sure the agricultural folks have their own. How can we bring them together to be able to appreciate these interconnections? Planetary health innovation, thinking out of the box. I'm pretty sure you've heard a lot about, this growing startup culture. Young people, the millennials, they don't want to join anywhere the big corporations or governments. They want to build their own companies that introduce new technologies and novel ideas to solve social problems. I'm seeing a potential in that space for planetary health as well. And then implementation. How can we implement better? How can we deliver results and not just get stuck in the arena of policy? And then ultimately, the 7I is inspiration, although another suggestion to me was instigation. How do we move people to actually act on these ideas? Through communication, through storytelling, through the combination of narratives, but also evidence. The numbers are also very important. I always say that, when you're going to give a TED Talk, there are 3 S's for system change. You need to start with a story, and then you move to the science, the statistics, the evidence, and you have to give me the solution. Otherwise, I will leave the room either, with a shallow idea of the situation or feeling despondent and even hopeless to act. The last section is planetary health in the Philippines, especially the UP, the University of the Philippines, Los Baños. And I already mentioned to you a while ago that, in the past 3 planetary health conferences, usually there's Renzo and 1, 2, or 3 other Filipinos. We need to change that story. And what do we need to do domestically to make sure that we build a community for planetary health in this country? We need to collaborate between disciplines, and this is something we always pay lip service to. We want to work with the College of Arts and Sciences, we want to work with the College of Economics, but we are not comfortable when our territories are being challenged by the other disciplines. So really, there's a need for greater openness and acceptance of our, not just, strengths, but also the limitations and weaknesses of our respective disciplines. And we can do this also between campuses. I already said UP Manila, given its emphasis on human health. Interestingly, they're so focused in healthcare, the provision of healthcare, but not necessarily about the more upstream determinants of health, like environmental change, which UPLB is, I would argue, the strongest campus when it comes to this area. Identify key priorities. I've already talked a lot about the planetary health issues. For sure, these planetary health issues exist in our country. But if we are going to choose 5 key priorities, what are they? Air quality, food system transformation, changing agricultural practices, etc., etc. Education and training. I still have to see a planetary health curriculum, or even just a module, or even just a course with a Filipino context. Okay? So that's a challenge for UP Los Baños. If you can innovate and develop that kind of course, it will be an awesome contribution to the country and to the field. Creating a community, and yesterday I was talking to a colleague from UP Manila. What we're planning to do is to do a mapping exercise of planetary health-related activities across the Philippines. Because this is our suspicion. No one calls their project planetary health, but they are, in their very core, planetary health research and practice activities. So we want to have a landscaping exercise. Maybe UPV is doing a lot of work on fisheries and their impacts on protein deficiency in coastal communities. Maybe UP Los Baños is doing work on deforestation and infectious disease resurgence. And hopefully, 2020, I've said 2021 is the global conference. 2020, we hope to organize a national convene to bring all of us, from the different campuses and different places, and explore synergies and get updated about what the other people are doing. And then finally, science-based advocacy. But we need to back this with research, because we can't keep on talking planetary health, but we're not doing planetary health work. We need to back this with research, with tangible impacts in the community. So we can lobby, let's say, to the DOST, you have to make it a priority. Okay? Because right now, even DOST's funding streams are siloed. If it's a health project, you go to PCHRD. If it's agriculture, you go to PICAR. And we need to make sure, linked to what I just said, that our planetary health efforts are not detached from the communities that we want to serve. That is the top picture. That is what the top picture represents. And the policy makers and decision makers that we want to influence. Those 2 audiences are critical if we want to win the battle for planetary health. We need to adopt a health in all policies approach. And you might say, oh, this is too health-centric. Is it just all about human health? But really, at the end of the day, doing all these things, whether forest conservation or agricultural systems or transport and energy, to make sure that life on Earth is a pleasant experience and a fulfilling experience for humanity. So how can we bring health into our respective colleges, into our respective sectors? And just, perhaps an advertisement. This is what I'm currently building, and I want to build a lab that will, adopt this 3D approach, diagnose, design solutions, and deliver results for the different PHS that exist in this country. Philippines, public health, and most of all, planetary health. Okay? So if you want to work with me, come and join. And just to remind you that right now, we are living in this era of the Sustainable Development Goals. 17 goals, 169 targets, 11 years remaining. scarce resources, very rigid and slow-moving bureaucracies. That is the reality. Okay? And so our role, the planetary health community, the academia, is how can we accelerate the action towards achieving the SDGs, which I would argue is a language of planetary health. As you can see, all the issues that I was talking about, they're all embedded in the SDG framework. We don't want to be this kind of physician that is treating the cough, which I currently have, without addressing the root causes of the cough. Pollution, poverty, exploitation. Okay? And if this is our mindset, we just don't need physicians and even just public health folks. We need each and every one of you to be part of the business of health creation in the era of planetary health and sustainable development. And instead of that doctor, we need doctors who are solar panel huggers. Okay? And that can be all of us as well. Because before they say environmentalists are tree huggers. No, this is the new form of environmental advocate. In fact, I heard from somewhere, we should make sure that the term environmentalist becomes obsolete. Because every citizen of this planet takes care of the planet, of the environment. It becomes embedded in her or his DNA. Okay? What we need in the 21st century are planetary healers, I would use healers, who will care for the health of both people and the planet. Okay? And my last quote is from Arthur Schopenhauer, German philosopher. Health is not everything, but without health, everything that we do is nothing and useless and futile. So, I have another slide. This is my slide, my last slide in my thesis presentation at Harvard. I made a personal manifesto, finding my planetary health purpose. I devoted myself to systems thinking, cross-sectoral work, and innovation. I embedded in myself a deep concern, not just of people that I was trained to treat, but of the planet, which I am commanded to take care of, with equity and justice. So I'm just saying what I said a few minutes ago. And finally, commitment to translating knowledge into action and delivering concrete results. We need to be not just scholars, but scholar practitioners, making sure that what we generate, the knowledge we generate, in such an amazing university like Baños, makes a direct impact to the world, in the service of the world's poor, vulnerable, and marginalized. Okay, let's all be planetary healers. Thank you very much.